Hey guys, Matt from Pomelo Pictures here, and as you may have seen a couple of months ago, I did a video review of the Fandu belt Big Gold, as well as a history of the original belt to go along with it. But in that review I tried to compare the Fandu version to the official replicas, currently distributed by WWE, using a mini replica from the year 2001 and a series of pictures to illustrate my points. But I'm happy to say that I now finally have an official WWE licensed WCW World Heavyweight Championship, and I can give you a proper comparison between the two. Now, first things first, this belt is from the year 2010, so this is the version with the 2mm thick plates, as opposed to the 4mm thick version that you can get today, although the 2mm version is also still available from some outlets. This one also appears to have been sold via WrestlingSuperstore.com, which is traditionally where all of my replicas have come from in the past. This one in particular is a little bit beaten up and it's been modified somewhat, or at least so the guy who had it before me says. He supposedly replaced some of the stones with crystals, and we can also see a few scuffs on the main plate. But either way, this is still perfect for this kind of video. But before we start, just a note on crystals. Now, I've had my Fandu for a couple of months now, and already a crystal has fallen out. You do actually get a few spares when you order a belt from them, but just something to be aware of if you're thinking of buying one. Now, in terms of comparing these two belts, the biggest thing that gets me is the fact that this thing is as flat as a pancake. Although with only 2mm thick plates, it should be easy enough to bend, as even though the original was still fairly flat, it wasn't quite like this. I mean, it's actually pretty off-putting how flat it is, because it doesn't sit well on your waist or your shoulder. And you need to bear in mind that these used to be advertised as being moulded from the original belt, but there are some pretty significant differences between this and the original Crumrine belt, which suggests that they never really were. Firstly, to point out a few of the details. This rope band around the outside of the plates isn't actually much of a rope at all, it's more of just an etching, compared to the Fandu belt where the rope is fairly pronounced, on both the main plate and the side plates, and also the nameplate as well. While the WWE or WWF actually only ever used a cast copy on TV, the old WCW replicas should have used the Crumrine version as its basis, and even the all-gold cast that appeared on WWF TV, as it was back then, still had a reasonably pronounced rope border. And obviously, like that version of the belt and the subsequent WWE World Heavyweight Championship, this is an all-gold colour belt, while the original was two-tone, most notably around the writing at the top here, which was also textured, whereas this is a flat single colour, although still very different to the Fandu, which I'll get onto in a minute. I do have to admit that the strap is much better than it used to be. In the last video I showed you the state of an original WCW replica and the torn simulated leather strap, whereas this one is notably softer and actually even smells like real leather, even though it's not. But if I put this one aside and I bring in the Fandu, this one actually has an extremely floppy faux leather strap to it, which is very in keeping with the way the Crumrine leather ended up, although technically that was a burgundy/brown colour, but just went black over time. But with these massive 8mm thick plates, the strap can actually feel a little bit unsubstantial at times, although obviously you can get a real leather strap straight from source, which I'm told is generally better quality than the WWE shop versions, and I'm going to try and get my hands on one of these very soon. In actual fact, the Fandu belt is technically lighter than the official belt, depending on which version you have, of course, but because the weight is mostly centred around this smaller but very chunky main plate, it feels heavier in hand. Now, in terms of size and colour, the best thing I can do is show you a comparison of the two belts side by side and laid on top of each other. I'm not sure how clearly this will come out on camera, but the colouring on the Fandu belt is much closer to the WWE version and also the Scott Steiner cast copy, while the official replica is much less yellow. From a distance, the official belt probably looks closer to how it should be, being that the original belt was two-tone. Although obviously you can also get a two-tone Fandu, which will cost you a little bit more than the all-gold version. Even though side by side the Fandu looks a lot smaller, officially there's only about 1/4 of an inch between the two main plates. The bigger difference is in the width of the main plate. So, if I manoeuvre this a little bit and place them on top of each other, there we go. You can notice the 1.5 inch difference on the sides here, but you also need to bear in mind that there's a big curve on this plate. If I try and line them up as best as I can, there we go. You do actually see the difference, but as I say, this plate on the Fandu is curved, whereas on the official belt, it's as flat as a pancake. So when it is curved, they will actually look a little bit the same. Now, when I just take the Fandu away, you can see that the official one actually looks a bit stretched out, although having said that, the original crumb rind was a bit close to these proportions, as obviously this is meant to be a cast of the crumb rind, even though I don't think it really is. Now, the dimensions of the side plates are more or less the same. Now, when I say the same, I mean in terms of surface area anyway, but they're slightly wider and shorter on the Fandu belt, which then also translates to the width of the strap. And with a smaller strap, it again makes the Fandu look a lot smaller. So if I just lift this up, you can see this sort of shorter and not as wide plate on the, taller but not as wide plate on the official belt. Whereas if I lay this over, we've got a much shorter but much wider belt here. So because this is shorter here, this strap is not as thick. If I try and bring it in line with the bottom here, you see it's got sort of 1/4 of an inch more in terms of strap. So it can all add up to make the Fandu look a lot smaller, when in reality it's not actually that much smaller at all. It's just the way it looks. It's kind of hard to describe really, but the best thing I can do is just lay them on top of each other and kind of let you decide. But then obviously when I manoeuvre them like this, you can see how much bigger the official belt actually looks. But there are other size differences, like the size of these wrestlers on the main plate here and also on the side plates, which are much smaller on the Fandu version and don't stand out as much. There's actually far more detail on the official belt, despite the vastly superior etching on the majority of the Fandu. If I zoom in close, you can see the detailing on their hair and outfits, whereas that detail is lost on the Fandu despite the deeper etching. Now personally, I think I do still prefer the Fandu belt, but if I had one criticism of it, it would be the fastenings at the back. Because the plates are thick and curved, you can sometimes pinch a fingertip or a bit of skin between the belt fastening and the leatherwork, and given the weight, it can be quite painful because of the force created. In terms of prestige, it's hard to decipher between the two. The Fandu belt is definitely the more chunky and impressive belt, but the plates sometimes clash against each other, and also if you're a wrestling fan from the days of the original Big Gold, you'll notice that the Fandu version is definitely Fandu's own take on the belt rather than a replica, in which case it's predominantly going to come down to personal taste. I feel that the official belt is definitely more the authentic version despite the arguably inferior quality, but being only 5'8" and less than £200, the Fandu is a better fit for me, although obviously that doesn't matter if you're just planning on displaying it rather than pretending you're the next World Heavyweight Champion, which I definitely don't do. But anyway, I actually got the official version for fairly cheap in comparison to a new belt straight from the WWE shop anyway, seeing as it was previously owned and also a little bit beaten up. But in terms of cost, the Fandu is definitely still the best bang for your buck. You can get a Fandu belt on a real leather strap for cheaper than the official WWE version, and arguably the Fandu is the nicer belt. I mean, they're both nice belts, but they both have their flaws too. Neither is a perfect replica by any means, so if you want a custom belt, you can spend a lot more money to get yourself something closer to the original. But the Fandu belt is actually something a bit different because it's technically its own design. Rather than a WCW replica of the Big Gold, it's Fandu's own take on the Big Gold, and there's loads of customization options available as well. While I do like the WWE replica, it's hard to recommend it over the Fandu belt. But I'm a bit torn. Because while there's no doubt that the Fandu is the more impressive looking thing, I have to look at both of these as the WCW belt. And despite the flat etching and the pancake plates, the official belt does actually look more the part than the Fandu, especially from a distance anyway, and certainly on camera too. I know when I snapped a picture for my Instagram page that the official replica did actually look closer to the real thing, despite not looking as impressive in real life. But at the end of the day, well, here's your options. Which one would you choose? Until next time guys, I'll see you later.